Now, along those same lines with devolution, you've got the difference between federal and unitary states. And it all has to do with how governments are going to govern the people within their state. All political systems fall on a continuum from the most concentrated amount of power to the least. That right there comes from the Ethel Wood AP Human Geography Review Manual. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that. It's a pretty good little review book. I don't think it's as good as AMSCO, but it's pretty close. And what it does in that book is it shows you a little graphic that looks pretty much like my drawing there. And you've got on the far left your more centralized unitary governments, and on the right, confederal governments. Now, a confederation is like a loosely allied group of independent regions, really, that together kind of collectively make up a country or a group of people. You could argue that some of your earliest confederations might go back to the ancient Greeks under the Delian League, for example, where Athens kind of was the main city-state and controlled, or I guess kind of allied themselves with a bunch of other city-states to fight the Persians. But really, confederal governments haven't worked that well historically. And then there's federalism right here in the middle. Now unitary governments and federal governments, these are the two most important ones you want to know out of the three here. In fact, several years ago, there was an FRQ that was specifically on the differences between unitary and federal states. So chances are pretty good you're not going to see that on FRQ this year, but you could see something related to this, not maybe directly on that exact same topic. But over here on the left, you can't really see it at all, but there's a list of federal states. I wish you could see it some. A few of the, not federal, unitary states. Usually, unitary states are going to be geographically small. And federal states, which I've got a few here, are usually geographically large. So one thing I do want to say is that even though we've discussed devolution in the United Kingdom, the United Kingdom is not considered to be a federal system. I know that's hard to understand because we think of the United States and how central government and state governments share power to govern people. In a lot of ways, it's very similar in the United Kingdom, but it is considered to be a unitary state. France is a unitary state. Most European countries are relatively geographically small and are unitary states due to their history. Okay, so you can't. I knew I'd prepared. I should have given myself more credit. This here is a list. You've got Greece, for example, Iran, which is a little bit larger, but still basically a theocracy. South Korea, a little bit further down. North Korea, Rwanda. The United Kingdom is on there, but I cut it off whenever I took the screenshot. So a lot of countries, not just European, but from all over the world. On the federal side, not confederal, but federal, you got your larger countries like Brazil, like Canada, like Australia, like the United States, like Russia. Okay, is a good example of a federal government. It works like this. Federal states' powers divided constitutionally between the central government and the regional governments. The perfect example of a federal system is the United States and the 50 states. Probably the best example of the world right there. The unitary states are going to be those that the central government controls more or less everything, even kind of like your smaller end, things that you would think would be kind of nothing subjects or processes are controlled by the central government, such as local governments or an extension of the central government. Things like education licenses and public health and safety and things like that might be controlled by the central government. So in order to get your driver's license, you would need to get some kind of approval from the capital. Another thing, not to get too far ahead of ourselves in the subject, but a lot of times a unitary state is going to have a primate city as their capital. In other words, a city that has a far larger population, far more politically and economically important than the rest of the cities within the country. And so you see that in a lot of unitary states. Like, for example, in France, the capital was Paris, which would be an example of a primate city. more on federal and unitary states. Just a little screenshot I got from a website that summarizes the federal system in the United States. National government's going to do things like print money, regulate trade, interstate and international, make treaties, declare a war, all that stuff. State governments usually are going to do your lesser dramatic chores, like issuing licenses, conducting elections, establishing local governments, taking measures for public health and safety, etc. Both are going to be able to do these things down here: collect taxes, build roads, borrow money, establish courts. That really is kind of how a federal system is going to work. It's that certain things are going to be shared by the central and by the local state governments. Other things that our states are able to do is laws on stuff like legalizing marijuana. That's one that states are able to do because some countries or some states in the South might not want that because of their regional, cultural, Christian values, and other states which are not quite as religious or I guess a little bit more libertarian with their views are like, hey, let's go smoke up, and we should be able to do that if we can drink. So states are able to make decisions like that. Usually federal governments or national governments are making bigger decisions that kind of apply to everyone on the whole. And so they share that power in such a way. I've already mentioned that unitary states tend to be smaller. Not always. China is oh, holy crap. Oh, okay, I see what I did. All right, yeah. So I put it down. I probably should have put it in the other place. China is a unitary system. It is the exception to a federal state. So in other words, since China is super large geographically, you would think it would be a federal state, but it's actually unitary under the People's Republic. The exception to federal states, usually being large, is Belgium. We just talked about Belgium being a freakishly small state in Europe, which is actually a federal system rather than a unitary one. And then you've got your regular go-to examples. Basically, all of the European countries, for the most part, is going to be a unitary state. And this is because of their history of monarchy, really, and centralized government. Germany is one exception. They're more of a federal state. But you also look at Germany's history, and they were only united as a country in the late 1800s. So that's part of the reason for that as well. Confederation, do we still have those? Probably the only one that's worth noting is the Confederation of Switzerland. I got a map here. I don't even know if you consider that an actual confederation, like the Confederate States of America, for example, but it's probably the closest thing you're going to see today of a bunch of regional governments that are allied to be one single country. Some of the examples of failed confederations over time is the Articles of Confederation. Our first government was based on the Articles of Confederation, which, each state pretty much was going to be their own independent country. One state, South Carolina, could wage war with Britain if they wanted to, and none of the other states could stop them. Things like that didn't work out well for us. Another example of a failed confederacy is the Confederate States of America, which was the South during the Civil War. Once again, one of the number one things. Obviously, slavery was a big deal there, but one of the main things that the South felt that the North was doing is controlling their economy by outlawing and abolishing slavery. So they wanted to make sure that the central government couldn't control how they were doing their economy in the South. Other historical confederations include the Holy Roman Empire. Could be an example of a confederation that was really a group of principalities. A principality is a territory that's governed by, you guessed it, a prince. But they basically were loosely allied with one another and came together to do the bidding of the Holy Roman Emperor, at least while that person was powerful. Later on, he didn't have a whole lot of power over them, and eventually it crumbled. And then you've also got the Confederacy of German States, which was prior to Germany's unification in the 1800s. The Confederation of German States emerged due to the what was that conference? It's totally slipped my mind. In 1815, there was a group of countries that got together after Napoleon, and I can't believe it slipped my mind. Y'all know what I'm talking about? European history scholars in there? Jeez, I'll remember the second this presentation is over. But anyway, they held a conference, and Metternich was one of the main men there from Austria. And anyway, that's kind of where the Confederacy of German states emerged.